It's time for you to relax. So make yourself comfortable, however that looks for you. And if you would like to, gently close your eyes. I'm speaking to you today about healing the silent disconnection of family you've always felt but never named. And I'm going to speak to you today in a way that's designed to nourish the unconscious part of your mind, the part of you that doesn't need to think in words, the part that knows how to heal, how to let go, how to grow. The part where change begins, not through force but through understanding. You're gaining wisdom whilst you rest. If at any point you're distracted by sounds, thoughts, sensations, there's no need to resist. Simply notice it and let it go. Allow yourself to return again to this moment, softly, easily, calmly. You can relax just as you do in those quiet moments before sleep, or when your mind drifts off in a daydream, like lying on a boat floating down a slow river beneath a warm sky, like those moments in meditation or in the depth of a gentle hypnosis. That's where we're going today. You've already been there before. Now you'll return with more purpose. And as we journey through this session together, I'll guide you with words. But the real work, the deep, quiet shifts, will happen in you, silently, naturally. At the end, you'll know this session is complete because you'll hear a song. The song reflects the journey we've taken together. You're welcome to stay and listen. And when the music ends, that will be your signal to open your eyes, to return, to re-enter your world, gently renewed and wiser. But for now, relax. 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 There's a lie that gets told to bright children, not directly, not cruelly, but quietly and often. The lie is that being intelligent will make your life easier. That cleverness opens doors. That insight brings respect. That being smart makes you belong. But no one warns you that intelligence comes at the cost of connection. No one tells you that being the sharpest mind in the room can sometimes feel like being the loneliest. You don't always notice it at first. Maybe you grow up thinking that everyone notices the things you do, the inconsistencies, the contradictions, the emotional gaps in conversations. But over time, you start to realize they don't. You spot flaws in logic that others miss. You offer ideas that land too heavily in the room. You ask questions that make people uncomfortable, not curious. And suddenly, you're not part of the conversation anymore. You're outside of it, watching it happen like theatre. What's strange is, you're not trying to alienate anyone. You're not trying to be difficult or intimidating. You just think deeply. You feel deeply. But that very depth, your ability to see 10 layers down when others stop at the surface, becomes a source of discomfort for them and then, inevitably, for you. You start adjusting. You water down your words. You pretend not to notice what you notice. You let things slide, not because you're unsure, but because you've learned that being right isn't the same as being welcome. And somewhere in that subtle shifting of self, you begin to vanish. Not all at once, but piece by piece. It's a strange paradox. The more intelligent you are, the more invisible you may become. Not because you lack presence, but because your presence threatens the illusion of simplicity that others rely on. And when they feel that discomfort, they'll either pedestal you or avoid you. Neither response feels good. You didn't want to be a guru. You just wanted to connect. But connection is harder now. You're in the room, but not of it. You nod. You smile. You keep your brilliance tucked behind your teeth, trying not to offend with the way you understand the world. So here's the question. What do you do when the very thing that makes you exceptional also makes you feel exiled? Keep listening, because in the next part, we're going to uncover the hidden programming you internalized years ago that taught you how to shrink your mind just to survive your relationships. You weren't born knowing how to hide. You were trained. Gently, subtly, repeatedly. Maybe it started in school. You answered too many questions, finished your work too fast, corrected the teacher, or worse, asked the kinds of questions that made her feel exposed. You weren't being rude. You were curious, observant, wired differently. But instead of celebration, you got side eyes, the sighs, the "you think you're so clever" remarks from classmates who mistook your insight for arrogance. The praise you got from adults turned into suspicion from peers. So you adjusted. You stopped raising your hand. You slowed down your pace. You let others win. You learned that if you wanted to be liked, you'd have to be less vocal, less quick, less precise. And this didn't just happen once. It happened in classrooms, friendships, families. It happened with siblings who were told they were the funny one or the sporty one, while you were the brainy one, as if intellect was a character flaw that needed softening. You were told to let others have a go, to stop showing off. But you weren't showing off, you were just showing up. And then came the double bind. Now, I'll count from 5 down to 0 as we explore this more. It will become lighter and lighter. And with each number, allow yourself to drift a little, more settled, more still. 5. Sinking into the surface beneath you. 4. Your shoulders softening, your breath slowing. 3. Your thoughts becoming quieter, less important. 2. Every part of you safe, present, calm. 1. Deeply relaxed. And 0. Just be here now. Because even when you shrank, they still didn't see you. They didn't connect. You were either too much or you were nothing. And you started to internalize that maybe your mind was the problem. That perhaps if you could just think less, feel less, ask less, then maybe you'd fit. But let's name what this really is. It's social survival. You weren't abandoning your intellect for fun. You were doing it to stay safe. Because human beings are wired for connection. And when your gifts make that connection fragile, it's your gifts that get locked away. The tragedy is many intelligent people become experts at masking. They develop an entire personality that's more socially acceptable, less threatening, more agreeable, and they can do it well. But inside, they're empty, watching the words come out of their own mouth and thinking, this isn't me. This isn't even interesting. And the longer you wear the mask, the more distant you become from the mind you once loved. The mind that lit up when learning, when exploring, when imagining possibilities no one else could see. That mind gets muted, out of necessity, out of fear, out of pattern. But what if you could trace that pattern back to its origin and unlearn it? Keep watching, because next we're going to talk about what it actually costs you to keep shrinking, not just socially, but psychologically, professionally, emotionally. The price you've paid to be palatable. The cost isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It builds, quietly, like limescale on a tap, slowly blocking your own flow. At first, it's just a small compromise. You change the way you speak. Use simpler words. Hold back the metaphor that popped into your head because you're not sure it'll land. You laugh at the conversation even though it bores you. You hear someone get a fact wrong, painfully wrong, but you let it go. Not worth the social tension. Not again. And then, one day, you realize you're no longer speaking in your own voice. You've become a translator, not of language, but of self. You've simplified your thoughts to the point that they no longer satisfy you. You've lowered your ceiling so often it's now the floor. And even when you're in a room full of people, you're lonely, not because you're antisocial, but because you're disconnected. It's the kind of loneliness that doesn't go away with more company, only with more truth. And it starts here. Now relax and go even deeper. Deeper with every exhalation. Feeling the weight of your body, the pull of gravity, the way your muscles let go without needing permission. Your shoulders, your jaw, your stomach, all soft, easy, slow. There's nothing to hold now, so just drop. Here's the part no one tells you. When you shrink to stay included, you are exiling the most sacred parts of yourself. The precision, the nuance, the humor that's layered, not slapstick. The deep questions that have been rolling around in your mind for days, but never get voiced because what if it kills the vibe? You've learned to stay surface level with people who never had the capacity for depth. And now your mind, your beautiful, intricate mind, sits unspoken, dormant, like a book no one's reading. The result? You feel like the weirdo in the room. Not because you are, but because you've become fluent in a dialect that was never yours, and now every conversation feels like mimicry, every laugh slightly hollow, every connection a little thinner than it should be. And you don't even get the reward you hoped for. You're not more connected, you're just more tired. You're performing relatability, not living it. The self that emerges in those moments isn't you. It's the version of you they can handle. But deep down, you know. You know that this isn't sustainable. That shrinking has made you resentful. That pretending to fit is starting to ache. Because the worst kind of loneliness isn't being alone, it's being unseen. Stay with me, because in the next part I'll show you how this shows up in real people's lives, and how it almost always begins with one mirror moment, a conversation, a comment, a relationship, where your intelligence became a weapon against you. It usually starts small. A throwaway comment, a moment that seems insignificant, but lingers. Maybe it's someone joking that you always have to be right. or that you make things too deep, or that you overthink everything. They say it with a smile, but it lands like a warning. For one man I worked with, a surgeon turned consultant, it came after a meeting when a colleague said, "You've got a habit of making people feel stupid, you know." He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't insulted anyone. He'd simply asked a layered question. But that was enough to unsettle the room, enough to make them defensive, enough to label him the problem. That was his mirror moment. The first time he realized that intelligence doesn't always earn respect. Sometimes it earns resentment. And from that moment on, he found himself second-guessing everything. In conversations, he softened his tone, paused before speaking, avoided topics he loved because they led to debates, not dialogue. And the more he withheld, the more he disappeared. Not physically, but psychologically. He became edited. He told me something that stuck. People either mine your mind for answers, or they ignore it completely. There's rarely a middle ground. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. You start noticing how often you're censoring yourself, how frequently you play dumb just to keep a conversation smooth. You catch yourself faking interest in banter that numbs you. You realize you're holding back your actual thoughts, not because they're wrong, but because they're too right. And people don't want right. They want agreeable. That's when the loneliness sharpens. Not just loneliness from others, but disconnection from your own mind. You stop trusting your instincts. You start doubting your depth. And over time, you become a stranger to the very brilliance that once lit you up. It's not loud. It's slow. Death by dilution. And by the time you notice it, it's already cost you years. But here's the truth. That moment of realization, painful as it is, isn't just a wound. It's a map. A signal that you're not broken. You're just awake. You're not losing people because you're too much. You're shedding people who only knew the version of you that played small. That's not tragedy. That's transition. And in the next part, we're going to explore what happens when that awareness becomes action. When you stop negotiating your intelligence for comfort and begin reclaiming it unapologetically. At some point, you stop asking, "How do I fix this?" Because you realize it's not something to fix. It's not a fault in your wiring. It's a mismatch in your environment. That's the shift. Not from isolation to instant belonging, but from pathologizing your mind to honoring it. There's no dramatic breakthrough, no grand gesture. It happens in the quiet. You're in a conversation that would have bored you 6 months ago, and it still does. But now, instead of blaming yourself for feeling disconnected, you just notice it. You name it. This isn't my space. And that simple sentence changes everything. You stop contorting. You stop pretending you're fascinated by surface talk when your brain is wired for depth. You stop making yourself palatable to people who were never hungry for truth. And instead, you start coming home to yourself. It's not always pretty. There's grief in it. Because you start letting go of the relationships you built from the version of you that was willing to shrink. People you love even. And it's not because you don't care. It's because you can't carry the weight of staying small anymore. You can't keep dimming just to maintain peace, because that peace cost you too much. You start seeing the pattern in hindsight, how often you've disconnected from others, not out of cruelty, but because you were evolving. And not everyone could come with you. Some people will interpret your silence as arrogance. Let them. Some will see your withdrawal as judgment. Let them. You'll learn to live without justifying your growth to people committed to misunderstanding it. And if you're lucky, there will be a few, just a few, who stay. People who've watched you shed skins and still recognize you underneath it all. People who don't feel threatened by your expansion, because they're expanding too. Those are your people. Not the ones who tolerate you, but the ones who see you. The ones who don't require you to be smaller, to feel safe. The ones who remind you that solitude isn't punishment, it's preparation. Because this is the truth that makes the loneliness bearable. Your isolation isn't a problem to solve, it's an invitation to evolve. And coming up, we're going to unpack the psychology behind this, why your mind has always worked differently, and what neuroscience and philosophy both say about the pain and the power of thinking deeply in a shallow world. Stay close. There's a psychological name for what you've been experiencing. It's called asynchronous development, when different parts of you mature at different speeds. In childhood, it often looks like this: a 10-year-old with the reasoning skills of an adult, but the emotional regulation of, well, a 10-year-old, or a teenager with philosophical insight, who still panics when their phone battery dies. It creates internal friction. But more than that, it creates external misunderstanding. People don't know how to relate to someone whose mind outpaces their years, and that disconnect doesn't magically disappear in adulthood. The world is built to mirror the majority. If your thoughts are faster, deeper, more layered, you're often met with confusion or resistance, not because you're wrong, but because your wiring sits outside the statistical norm, and anything outside the norm becomes a target for pressure, conform, simplify, shrink. Then you've got the Dunning-Kruger effect, the psychological tendency for those with lower ability to overestimate themselves, while those with higher ability underestimate. The more intelligent you are, the more aware you become of how much you don't know. Which means that while you're gently second-guessing, others are confidently wrong, loudly wrong. And socially, confidence trumps competence every time. So what happens? You retreat. You go quiet. You let the loud be loud, even when they're incorrect, not because you lack clarity, but because you've learned that correcting them costs you more than it's worth, and that retreat becomes chronic. There's also neurodiversity to consider. Many highly intelligent individuals show patterns that overlap with autism spectrum conditions: intense focus, pattern recognition, deep inner worlds, sensory sensitivity. This doesn't mean you're autistic, necessarily. But it does suggest that your brain processes information in a way that's fundamentally different. And difference in our culture is rarely met with curiosity. It's met with containment. Even in environments that value intelligence, there are limits. Be bright, but not intimidating. Be informed, but not challenging. Be confident, but never correct someone in front of others. It's a minefield. And unless you understand the psychology behind this, you'll internalize the response. You'll believe you're the problem, that you're too intense, too awkward, too much. But that's not the truth. The truth is, you've been trying to sync up with systems that were never designed for your rhythm. But your conscious mind can rest now, effortlessly. Your conscious mind can let go of this work. Let it step aside, Let the deeper systems take over, the ones that don't need effort, only permission. Each breath recalibrates. Each moment is a soft reset. Nothing to fix. Just allow. So instead of twisting yourself into palatable shapes, maybe it's time to build new architecture around how your mind moves. Instead of seeing your silence as weakness, start recognizing it as discernment. You're not afraid to speak. You're just done wasting breath on people who hear your voice but not your meaning. Next, I want to show you what it looks like to live differently now. To apply this understanding practically, socially, and even financially, so your mind stops being a burden and starts becoming the asset it was always meant to be. Ready? So what now? You understand the cost. You see the pattern. You've probably lived the last decade trying to belong in rooms that were never built for you. This isn't about burning bridges or becoming bitter. It's about becoming deliberate. Start by noticing where you shrink. Noticing alone is powerful. You don't even have to change it at first. Just witness the moment where you soften your voice, dumb something down, hold back a correction, or play along with small talk that drains you. That's a breadcrumb. A moment where your authenticity is making way for approval. Now ask, what would it cost me to stop doing that? Not forever, just once. Maybe you speak the truth and the room goes silent. Maybe someone rolls their eyes. Maybe nothing happens, except you feel more you than you have in weeks. That's how you begin. Then, curate your environment. Ruthlessly, if you must. This doesn't mean you ghost everyone who doesn't quote Carl Jung over coffee, but it does mean you stop outsourcing your sense of belonging to people who only connect with your camouflage. You need people who meet you in the depth. People who don't flinch when your thoughts get sharp, or strange, or spiritual, or deeply inconvenient. Find those people, and if you don't know where they are, create conditions for them to find you. That might look like writing more honestly online, asking better questions in conversations, walking away from rooms that feel like theatre, or simply saying, I think about things a bit differently, instead of pretending you don't. And then, here's the part no one talks about, build a life where your intelligence pays you back. Emotionally, yes, but also literally. Financially, because your insight has value. Your clarity is rare. If you're constantly giving your best ideas away for free in conversations that go nowhere, stop. Package it. Teach it. Sell it. Lead with it. You don't need to monetize your soul, but you do need to stop being the unpaid emotional labor for everyone's blind spots. If people crave your clarity, let them invest in it. And if that feels crass, ask yourself, how many times have you invested in people who didn't even see you? This isn't about becoming hard. It's about becoming clear. You're not here to apologize for how your mind works. You're here to use it, to build relationships, businesses, boundaries, art, and ideas that wouldn't exist without you. Now let your body guide you. Feel the heaviness in your arms, the warmth in your hands, the gentle stillness of your spine, like a river settling after the rain. Smooth, clear, calm. Let the stillness wrap around you like warm air. This is where change settles in. And in this final part, I want to leave you with something deeper than strategy. I want to show you what it feels like to fully come home to your intelligence, to stop translating, to stop hiding, to be all of you and be safe there. Let's go. There comes a moment, not loud, not dramatic, where you stop reaching for the crowd. Not because you've given up on people, but because you've remembered yourself. You look around and realize you've been mistranslating your intelligence as a defect, not a design. You've been waiting for others to give you permission to speak, to stretch, to shine, when all along that permission was yours to give. This isn't about isolation anymore. It's about sovereignty. About no longer letting your inner world be dictated by the comfort of others, the ones who couldn't meet you in your mind. They weren't bad. They were just on a different path. And it's not your job to dim yourself for the sake of alignment that was never real. What begins to emerge now is something richer than confidence. It's coherence. You speak in your natural tone. You share thoughts without sugarcoating. You show up fully, not just where you're accepted, but even where you're not. For now, take the time to absorb, reflect. Allow the parts of you that have shifted to settle into place. Not everything needs to be understood. Some things just need to be felt. You're almost ready, but take a moment longer in this quiet space. You've done something most people never do. You looked at the wound and didn't flinch. You named the pattern without sugarcoating it. You stood still in your own truth, even when it felt like standing alone. Not to provoke, not to perform, but because hiding has become more painful than rejection ever was. And something magical happens when you live this way. The right people do start to appear, not in a movie montage kind of way, but in small, meaningful recognitions. You say something you thought would land awkwardly, and someone says, "Yes, I've thought that too." You're not alone. You were just early. The truth is, you were never too much. You were just never given the space to be much. But now you get to be. And for the record, I'm not telling you this as some anonymous voice on the internet. I'm not a faceless narrator parroting a script to get watch time. I've spent over 20 years working in therapy rooms with people who've lived this. Quietly, painfully, bravely. People who've been told their intelligence was a liability. People who've shrunk themselves for lovers, families, employers, and friends. And who eventually decided to stop. I've seen what happens when someone chooses to reclaim their mind, their rhythm, their voice. It's not just self-love, it's revolution. And it always begins with this moment, the one you're in now. So, to the one who always saw too much, felt too much, knew too much. You were never the problem. You were the awakening hiding in plain sight. And now, you don't have to apologize for your depth. You just have to live in it. The pain of intellectual isolation is a quiet, profound ache. It is the sensation of speaking a language few understand, of seeing connections that remain invisible to others, and of dwelling in a world of ideas that, for most, holds little appeal. This is not merely loneliness, which is the absence of company, but a more existential solitude, the feeling of being fundamentally out of sync with one's surroundings. For many highly intelligent individuals, this isolation is not a choice, but a consequence of their cognitive landscape. A price paid for a mind that operates at a different frequency. The journey from this pain to a place of peace is a central, often unspoken narrative in the lives of the intellectually gifted, a path illuminated by philosophers who have wrestled with this very tension. The animals huddle together for warmth, only to be driven apart by the pain of each other's quills. After repeated attempts, they settle on a distance that provides a modicum of warmth without the inevitable pricking. For Schopenhauer, this is the fundamental dilemma of human society. The intelligent individual, however, feels the quills more acutely. Their heightened sensitivity, their perception of triviality, hypocrisy, and intellectual poverty in mundane social exchange makes the pricking unbearable. Schopenhauer argues that a man of great intellect is driven to solitude because the compulsion of solitude is not so great as the compulsion of society. The pain, therefore, stems from a double bind. The human need for connection conflicts with an inability to find sustenance in convolutional interaction, leading to a voluntary yet agonizing withdrawal. This Schopenhauerian withdrawal finds a more existential expression in the works of Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch, Overman, is, in part, a response to the isolation of free thinking. The individual who dares to question inherited values, to philosophize with a hammer, and to create their own meaning inevitably severs themselves from the herd mentality of the last man, who is content with comfort and conformity. This process, which Nietzsche calls becoming what one is intensely lonely. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, the protagonist descends from his mountain solitude to share his wisdom with the people, only to be met with mockery and incomprehension. The pain of the intelligent is here reframed as the necessary suffering of the pioneer, the one who walks ahead of the crowd on a path they cannot yet see. The isolation is not a personal failing, but a symptom of a perspective too advanced for its time. Yet this isolation is not solely a product of social friction. The French philosopher Blaise Pascal, a profound mathematical and theological mind of the 17th century, located the source within the human condition itself. In his Pensées, Pascal observes, all of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. However, he immediately clarifies that this inability arises from a desperate need to escape the terrifying contemplation of our own finite existence. The German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer offers one of the most poignant frameworks for understanding this isolation. In his seminal work, Parerga and Paralipomena, he presents the metaphor of the porcupines. On a cold night, the animals huddle together for warmth, only to be driven apart by the pain of each other's quills. After repeated attempts, they settle on a distance that provides a modicum of warmth without the inevitable pricking. For Schopenhauer, this is the fundamental dilemma of human society. The intelligent individual, however, feels the quills more acutely. Their heightened sensitivity, their perception of triviality, hypocrisy, and intellectual poverty in mundane social exchange makes the pricking unbearable. Schopenhauer argues that a man of great intellect is driven to solitude because the compulsion of solitude is not so great as the compulsion of society. The pain, therefore, stems from a double bind. The human need for connection conflicts with an inability to find sustenance in conventional interaction, leading to a voluntary yet agonizing withdrawal. And if it feels like there's more space inside you now, it's because the performance finally shut up. The strength part, that's next. Strength isn't loud. It isn't fists or shouting or proving. Real strength is the moment you stay calm when everything in you wants to explain. It's choosing not to rise to the bait. Not because you're weak, but because peace is expensive. And you've finally realized not everyone deserves a piece of yours. This Schopenhauerian withdrawal finds a more existential expression in the works of Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch, Overman, is, in part, a response to the isolation of free thinking, the individual who dares to question inherited values, to philosophize with a hammer, and to create their own meaning, inevitably severs themselves from the herd mentality of the last man, who is content with comfort and conformity. This process, which Nietzsche calls becoming what one is intensely lonely. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, the protagonist descends from his mountain solitude to share his wisdom with the people, only to be met with mockery and incomprehension. The pain of the intelligent is here reframed as the... And here's what people don't talk about. Healing makes you quieter, not passive, just less available for nonsense. You'll be more selective, more still. And some people will say you've changed. Let them. That's how you know it's working. Here's the secret weapon. You don't need them to get it. You just need to stop getting lost in it. You don't need a big confrontation. You just need to stop performing in scenes that never honored you. And when your nervous system starts to panic, because it will, when your whole body screams, say something, fix it, make it nice, that's when you breathe and say silently, this is new. But I'm safe. I don't owe anyone my return. You thought healing would be loud. Turns out it sounds more like a door quietly closing that you don't reopen. The intelligent person, possessing a greater capacity for this very contemplation, is thus caught. They are more aware of the void, more haunted by the infinite silence of these infinite spaces, and yet also more aware of the emptiness of the diversions, gambling, gossip, prestige that distract the masses. Their isolation is a double-edged sword. It is born from a clear-eyed view of reality that is too overwhelming to share, making their silence a prison of perception. But this narrative of pain is not the end of the story. The very isolation that causes such profound anguish can, through a profound alchemy of the spirit, become the source of unparalleled lightness and peace. This transformation is the movement from loneliness to solitude, from a state of lack to a state of plenitude. Schopenhauer, for all his pessimism, ultimately concludes that the highest happiness lies in the riches of the self. For the individual with a vivid, active, and cogitative mind, solitude becomes a delightful, wonderful peace. The external noise fades and the internal world, a boundless universe of thought, creativity, and intellectual exploration, blossoms. The mind is no longer a burden, but its own greatest companion. This is the peace that Nietzsche's Zarathustra finds upon returning to his mountain cave. It is not the peace of emptiness, but of self-sufficiency. Having transcended the need for validation from the crowd, the isolated individual achieves a state of amor fati, love of one's fate, embracing their unique path and perspective with joy and affirmation. The pleasure is no longer found in shared trivialities, but in the profound dialogue with great minds across history found in books, in the relentless pursuit of truth and in the act of creation. The weight of misunderstanding is lifted, replaced by the lightness of self-authorization. Ultimately, the journey from the pain of intellectual isolation to a place of peace is a philosophical odyssey in itself. It requires the individual to follow the path laid out by these thinkers, to recognize the inherent friction described by Schopenhauer, to courageously embrace the independence championed by Nietzsche, and to confront the existential truths pinpointed by Pascal. The resolution is not found in the abandonment of intellect, but in its full embrace. The isolated mind discovers that its deepest sanctuary is within. In the quietude once feared, it finds a boundless landscape for thought, and in that boundless landscape, a profound and unshakable peace. The very sensitivity that made the world feel abrasive becomes the instrument for appreciating a richer, more nuanced reality, one that is beautiful, complex, and best contemplated in a silence that is no longer lonely but liberating. So here's the truth. This isn't a fix. It's a rhythm. It's a practice. And it gets easier. Because the more you walk away from what harmed you, the more you walk into what heals you. The performance ends. The repair begins, and after this, you rise. Keep listening to your own voice, because it's quieter, wiser, and more honest than the ones you used to contort yourself for. You're not loud, but you're certain. You don't need to prove your worth. It's when your boundaries stop sounding like apologies and start sounding like facts, and you don't over-explain anymore because there's no court to convince. You don't have to feel strong to be strong. Some days you'll feel shaky. Some days you'll replay the conversation 5 times before bed. That's fine. That's real. The strength isn't in perfection. It's in repetition. You hold the line again, and again, and again, until one day it doesn't feel like holding the line anymore. It just feels like you. Your strength might not be rewarded. It might not get applause. In fact, some people will hate it, because when you stop performing, they lose the script. When you stop softening your truth, they lose their comfort. Good. Let them. You were never meant to be digestible. You were meant to be whole. And the beautiful thing is, strength isn't something you chase. It's something you remember. Every time you told the truth, even when your voice shook. Every time you stayed when it was hard and walked away when it was harder. I've been in the room with the broken ones. I've trained the practitioners, built the frameworks, sat across from the silence and heard what goes unsaid. I'm not just a voice, I'm a therapist, a coach, a master trainer in psychology, NLP, DBT, and hypnotherapy. You can trust me with this, because I've lived it, and I see you. So now the work is this, to keep walking like you've already arrived. Not perfect, not fully healed, but healing in progress. But no longer trying to prove your pain to people who refuse to witness it. You've got your voice back. Now comes the practice of using it for peace, not permission. You're lighter now, not because the past disappeared, but because it doesn't live on your back anymore. It lives behind you, quiet, settled, neutral. You're not carrying it in your jaw, or your stomach, or your breath. You're breathing differently now, deeper, slower. like someone who's been let out of something they didn't even realize they were inside of. And the space that's been created, it's yours. Not borrowed, not negotiated, yours. You don't need permission to feel peace. You don't need a reason to feel good. You just do. And it's safe to enjoy that. It's safe to rest. It's safe to smile, even if no one else is smiling with you. In a moment, I'll count from 0 up to 5. And with each number, you'll begin to return, clear, calm, and aware. 0, breath deepening. 1, awareness coming back into your hands and feet. 2, more connected, more steady. 3, bringing back what you need and leaving behind what you don't. 4, fully present. And 5, eyes open when you're ready, awake, clear, and back with the world.
They say I'm too much, but I'm not enough. Brilliance feels like exile dressed as love. I hide my light just to stay in the room, but shrinking down is a kind of tune. No, I won't apologize for my depth. This mind was made to be more than kept. There's a lie they whisper to bright little kids, that cleverness makes life easier to live. But no one warns that connection will fade when your questions cut sharper than the games they play. You laugh on cue, you bite your tongue, dimming your mind just to get along. Every silence feels like a theft, till you're fluent in a voice that isn't yourself. They say I'm too much, but I'm not enough. Brilliance feels like exile dressed as love. I hide my light just to stay in the room, but shrinking down is a kind of tune. No, I won't apologize for my depth. This mind was made to be more than kept. Classrooms, families, every crowd, I learned to soften, not speak too loud. Let others win, they'd sigh and scold, while my questions turned to stories left untold. But the mask is heavy, it wears me thin, pretending I'm shallow when I'm oceans within. Every compromise leaves me erased, a stranger staring back from a barroom face. They say I'm too much, but I'm not enough. Brilliance This feels like exile dressed as love. I hide my light just to stay in the room, but shrinking down is a kind of tune. No, I won't apologize for my death. This mind was made to be more than care. What if I stop shrinking down to survive? What if my truth is the reason I thrive? The right ones won't flinch, they'll echo my tone, and for the first time I won't feel alone.